The day my doctor said, stage 3 out loud, I remember thinking about my daughter first. Not about the chemo, not about the survival rates he was about to walk me through. Just Meredith. How I was going to call her, what I was going to say. I should have known right then that something was wrong with that picture. That my first instinct in the worst moment of my life was to reach for someone who had already been slowly, quietly stepping back from me for years. But that's what fathers do, I guess. We keep reaching. I'm 51 years old. I work, or I used to work before all of this, in commercial HVAC. Spent 23 years crawling around rooftops and mechanical rooms in central Ohio, and I was proud of that. Honest work. Good money. I owned my house outright. I had a retirement account that wasn't embarrassing. My wife Carol passed from an aneurysm when Meredith was 14, and I raised that girl alone after that. I coached her soccer. I drove her to SAT prep on Saturday mornings when I could have been sleeping. I paid for 4 years at Ohio State without letting her take out a single loan, because Carol would have wanted that, and I wanted that too. Meredith is 31 now. She lives in Scottsdale with her husband, a guy named Tanner Howell, 34, who works in corporate real estate and has a jawline that makes him look like he was cast in a movie about corporate real estate. They got married 3 years ago. Big wedding, destination thing in Sedona, very beautiful, very expensive, and I wrote the check without complaining because, again, Carol would have wanted that. Meredith would have wanted that. I wanted her happy. The two of them live a life that I don't entirely understand but have always tried to respect. Gym at 5:30 a.m., matching water bottles, vacations that get posted before they even unpack. When they come back to Ohio for the holidays, Tanner spends most of the time on his phone, while Meredith explains to me why I should switch from cable to streaming, why I should get the countertops redone, why my neighborhood is, and she's used this word, stagnating. I used to laugh it off. I told myself she was just grown up and living a different life than the one she started in, and that was fine. That was good, even. I found out about the cancer in February, colon cancer stage 3. My gastroenterologist, Dr. Priya Nair, sat across from me with this very calm, very measured expression and explained the staging, the treatment plan, the surgery followed by 6 months of chemotherapy. She said the word curative intent, which I later learned means they think they can beat it, but it also means you're going to go through something serious to get there. I sat in the parking lot afterward for about 20 minutes before I could drive. Then I called Meredith. She picked up on the third ring. I hear the echo of what sounded like a gym, or maybe one of those expensive coffee places with exposed brick and bad acoustics. I told her I had something important to tell her. She said, "Hold on 1 second, I'm just," and then there was shuffling, and then she came back and said, "Okay, what's up, Dad?" I told her. There was a pause, and then she said, "Oh my God, okay, that's wow." I told her the details. Stage 3, surgery in 6 weeks, chemo after that. Probably 8 months of treatment total, if everything went the way they hoped. I told her I was scared. I don't think I'd said that word out loud to another person in a very long time, and I meant it completely. She said, "Dad, I hear you." Okay. So Tanner and I are actually in a really critical phase right now with the Sedona property, and we've got the Barcelona trip in April that we've been planning since last year, and I'm going to be honest with you. I cannot handle a major life crisis right now on top of everything else. I didn't say anything, she kept going. I'm not saying I don't care. Obviously I care. I'm just saying I need you to maybe lean on some of your friends there, or look into like a support group or something, because I really cannot be your emotional support person through this. I don't have the bandwidth. Bandwidth. She used the word bandwidth. I said, "Meredith, I'm telling you I have cancer." She said, "I know, Dad, and I'm sorry. Can we talk about this more next week? Once I've had a chance to process." I said, "Okay." I don't know why I said okay. Some reflex, I think. 31 years of being her father, and some part of me was still trying to make things easier for her, even in that moment. I hung up and sat in my kitchen and didn't really do anything for a while. She texted me 2 days later. A long text, 4 or 5 paragraphs, about how she loved me and was holding space for my journey, but needed to maintain her own mental health, and that she hoped I would understand. She included a link to a cancer support hotline and another link to something called a caregiver matching service. I didn't click either of them. She did not come to my surgery. I want to be precise about that, because it matters. My surgery was March 14th. They took 8 inches of my colon. I was in the hospital for 4 days. My neighbor, a retired postal worker named Walt Greer, 72, picked me up when I was discharged and drove me home and sat with me while I figured out how to take my pain medication. Walt and I had never been what I'd call close, We waved to each other, talked about the weather, that kind of thing. But he'd heard from someone on the street that I was going in for surgery, and he just showed up. He brought a casserole from his wife, Irene. It was the best thing I had eaten in months. Meredith called 2 days after I got home. She asked how I was feeling. I said I was sore and tired. She said she'd been meaning to call, but things had been hectic. I said I understood. More reflexes. Chemo started in April. 6 months of Folfox, which is a combination regimen, and I'm not going to sugarcoat what that's like, because I think people who haven't been through it sometimes have this idea that chemotherapy is like being tired for a while. It is not like that. There were weeks where I couldn't keep food down for 3 days at a stretch. The neuropathy in my hands and feet started around month 2, a cold, buzzing numbness that made holding a coffee cup feel strange and walking in the morning feel like stepping on gravel. I lost 22 pounds. I lost my hair, though that part I had been warned about and somehow cared about less than I expected. What I hadn't been warned about, or what I hadn't fully understood, was how long the days were going to feel. My work had been understanding. I was on FMLA and my short-term disability kicked in. But I wasn't working, and I wasn't well enough to do much around the house, and the hours between about 2 in the afternoon and 7 at night were very long and very quiet. I started watching a lot of baseball. I read some books I'd been meaning to get to for years, and somewhere in the middle of all that, I started actually talking to people. Walt came by twice a week, sometimes more. He'd sit at my kitchen table and drink coffee and tell me about the 30 years he spent sorting mail and the places he and Irene had traveled after he retired. He had a way of talking about ordinary things that made them sound like they mattered, and I found that genuinely comforting. Through Walt, I ended up at a weekly lunch at the community center over on Elm, not a cancer support group, just a lunch for people who wanted to get out of the house. There was a woman there named Beverly Crane, 67, a retired school librarian, who had lost her husband 4 years earlier and had the kind of dry, sardonic sense of humor that reminded me a little of Carol. And there was a man named Al Petrosian, 58, who ran a small landscaping company and had gone through his own cancer treatment, prostate, 2 years earlier, and who had a habit of saying the exact right thing in a very quiet, understated way. One afternoon, toward the end of a lunch when I was having a particularly rough week, Al looked at me across the table and said, "You know what I figured out? The people who show up when it's inconvenient are your actual people. Everyone else is just on your contact list." I thought about that for a long time afterward. Meredith called sporadically through those months, every few weeks, sometimes less. The conversations were short and followed a recognizable pattern. She would ask how I was doing. I would say I was hanging in there. She would say, "That's good, that's good." And then we would talk for a few more minutes about nothing in particular. And then she would say she had to run. She did not come to any of my chemo appointments. She did not ask if I needed anything. She did ask once, in June, if I was going to be well enough to travel by Thanksgiving, because she and Tanner were thinking about doing a Friendsgiving thing in Scottsdale and had been wondering if I wanted to come. I said I'd let her know my last infusion was in October. I rang the bell. They have a bell at the oncology center that patients ring when they finish treatment, and I had always thought it seemed a little cheesy when I first heard about it. But when the nurse handed me the rope, I cried in a way I hadn't cried since Carol died, and I didn't care at all who saw it. Beverly and Walt were there. Al had sent flowers to the front desk with a card that said simply, "Keep going." I kept that card. My scans in November came back clean, no evidence of disease. Nair used the phrase "excellent response," and I shook her hand for about 4 seconds longer than is probably normal for a handshake. I called Meredith that evening. I told her I was in remission. She said, "Oh my God, Dad, that's amazing, I'm so happy." She sounded genuinely happy, and I believe she was. I also noticed that she did not say anything about the fact that she had not been there, and I noticed that I did not bring it up. Old habits. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with Walt and Irene, Beverly, and 2 other people from our Thursday lunches. We had turkey and Irene's sweet potato casserole and a store-bought pumpkin pie that was, honestly, adequate. It was one of the better Thanksgivings I can remember. I heard from Meredith on Thanksgiving morning via text. She said Happy Thanksgiving and sent a photo of a charcuterie board. I sent back a heart emoji. That was that so. That's the setup. Here's where it turns. February. Almost exactly a year after my diagnosis, my phone rang on a Sunday evening and it was Meredith, which was unusual because she didn't usually call on weekends. She usually texted. I picked up thinking maybe something was wrong with Tanner, or maybe they had news. I had let myself wonder a few times if a baby might be on the horizon. She was crying before I could even say hello properly. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something." Tanner, it turned out, had left. Not for another woman, or at least not primarily. It was more that the marriage had been deteriorating for over a year. And Meredith had known it and she hadn't told me, and now he had moved out and filed papers, and she was alone in a house in Scottsdale that she couldn't afford on her own income, because her income was from a marketing consultancy she had started 2 years ago that had not yet become profitable. And the mortgage on that house was, to put it plainly, something she and Tanner had taken on together under assumptions that no longer held. She told me all of this in pieces, between crying, and then she got to the part I could tell she had been building toward. "I need to come home, Dad. I need somewhere to stay while I figure this out. I can't pay rent here and the mortgage there, and I don't have anywhere to go. I need you." She said those last 2 words very softly. "I need you." I held the phone and looked out my kitchen window at the backyard. There was still some snow on the ground. The bird feeder I had put up in November was swinging a little in the wind. I said, "I need time." Just those 4 words. She was quiet for a moment. "What?" she said. "I need time, Meredith. To think about this. Dad, I'm kind of in a crisis here. I need a yes or no." "I understand that," I said, "and I need time. I'll call you this week." She cried harder and said she didn't understand, and I told her I was sorry she was going through this, and I meant that sincerely. I genuinely was sorry she was in pain. And then I said goodnight and hung up. I sat at that kitchen table for a while. I want to be honest about what I was feeling, because I think it matters. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't the kind of clean, uncomplicated vindication that you might expect from a story like this. It was something more tangled than that. Grief and love, and something colder that I didn't quite have a name for yet, and underneath all of it, a question I kept circling back to. Who shows up for whom, and what does that mean? I called Al the next day. I told him what happened. He listened without interrupting, which is something I have come to appreciate about him. When I was done, he said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't know. He said, "Yes, you do." And he was right. I called Beverly that afternoon. Beverly had a daughter who'd had a difficult stretch a few years back, and I knew she'd been through some version of this. The question of how much to give and how much to hold back. She listened, and then she said something that I have thought about almost every day since. Loving someone and being their safety net are not the same thing. You can do one without doing the other. Most people in your life will never understand that distinction, but you can. I thought about Carol. I thought about her a lot during those days. I know with complete certainty that Carol would have shown up when I was sick. That was never in question. But I also know that Carol, who was one of the most clear-eyed people I have ever known, would not have been naive about what had happened. She would have felt the same grief I was feeling. She would have been angry too, maybe more than me, and she would have said eventually that doing the right thing and doing the easy thing were not the same. I called Meredith on Thursday, 4 days after her first call. I told her she could come. I want to be clear about that. I did not turn my back on my daughter. She is my daughter, and that is not a condition that can be revoked, and I did not want to revoke it. But I told her some other things too, and I told them to her plainly and without apology, because I had spent enough time in the last year learning what it felt like to say hard things out loud. I told her that what had happened while I was sick had hurt me in a way that I was still carrying. I told her I was not bringing it up to punish her, or to make her feel worse than she already did. I was bringing it up because I needed her to know it was real. I said I didn't want us to rebuild something on a foundation where we were both pretending that year didn't happen. She cried. She said she was sorry. She said she had been ashamed, that she had known even at the time that she was doing something wrong, and that the shame had made it harder to reach out rather than easier, which is its own kind of spiral that I think a lot of people understand. I told her I believed her. I told her she could come home. I told her she could stay in her old room for up to 6 months, and that we would work out what came next together, but that I needed us to actually talk about things. Actually talk, not the every few weeks surface calls we'd been doing for years. I needed her to understand that I was a person, not just a role, not just dad. A person who had been sick and scared and alone and had gotten through it. She said, "I know that, Dad." I said, "I'm not sure you did. I think you do now." She flew in on a Friday night. I picked her up at Columbus Airport. She looked smaller than I remembered, which sounds strange to say about a 31-year-old, but it's the truth. She gave me a long hug in the arrivals area, and I let myself hug her back completely, without reservation. On the drive home, she said, "I looked up what you went through, with the chemo. Olfox. I watched videos about it. I said, how'd that go? It made me feel like a terrible person, she said. You're not a terrible person, I said. You made a terrible choice. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what's the difference? The difference, I said, is that terrible people don't feel bad about it. She thought about that. Then she said, Walt came to your surgery. Walt and Irene? Yeah, your neighbor Walt. That's the one. She looked out the window. Okay, she said quietly, like she was filing something away. She met Walt the next morning. She met Beverly at the Thursday lunch 3 days later. She met Al the following week, when he stopped by the house to return a drill he'd borrowed, and ended up staying for 2 hours because the conversation wouldn't stop. He told her the thing he told me once, about the people who show up when it's inconvenient being your actual people, and I saw her face when he said it. She didn't try to argue with it. The 6 months turned into a longer stay by mutual agreement. The Scottsdale house sold in May, which gave her enough to clear the joint debt and start over with a clean balance sheet. She got a full-time position with a mid-sized company in Columbus, good salary, benefits, real footing. She and I started having dinner together on Tuesday nights, which sounds like a small thing but wasn't. There were hard conversations, more than once, the kind where someone says something true, and the other person has to just sit with it instead of defending. We got better at those over time. Not perfect, better. One Tuesday evening in August, we were sitting on the back porch after dinner, a couple of weeks before she moved into her own apartment. The bird feeder was full. It was warm, and still in that particular way Ohio evenings can be in late summer, where everything feels suspended for a moment. She said, "Do you think Mom would be disappointed in me?" I looked at her for a second. "Your mom," I said, "would be sitting right here with us, and she would have made you answer for it. And then she would have gotten over it because that's who she was. She loved you the way I love you. All the way." Meredith nodded slowly. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I want to meet Dr. Nair. I want to understand your monitoring schedule." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I'm coming to your next scan. I'll be there when you get the results. I want to do that." I looked at the bird feeder. "Okay," I said. She was there. October 6-month scan, clean again. She sat next to me in the waiting room, and when Dr. Nair came in and said the words, "No evidence of disease," Meredith grabbed my hand and squeezed it, and didn't let go for a long time. On the drive home, she said, "Bell next time." "I want to be there for the bell." I said, "There won't be a bell. That's just for end of treatment." She said, "There should be a bell for every clean scan." I said, "Right to the oncology center." She laughed. First time I'd heard her really laugh in what felt like years. It sounded exactly like Carol. I thought, we're going to be all right. Not fixed, not the way things were before, because things before hadn't been right for a long time, even if I hadn't let myself see that. But something better than before, something honest. There are people in my life now who were not there 2 years ago. Walt and Irene, Beverly, Al. And there are people who were technically always there, but who are actually here now. And that's a different thing entirely. I have learned the difference between presence and proximity. I have learned that you can love someone and still require something from them, and that requiring something is not the same as withholding love. I don't regret the 4 words. I thought about that call for a long time, whether I should have just said yes, whether the harder road was worth it. But those 4 words were not a door closing. They were a door pausing. They were me saying, "I am here. I have always been here. And I need you to understand that being here has a weight to it. And I need you to be willing to hold some of that weight now." She is willing. That's the whole story. That's all of it.